It's hard to ignore all the constant churn in international trade lately.
Definitely.
You see the headlines about tariffs, right, and the debates over trade balances, and it just feels like the whole foundation of how countries exchange goods is being looked at again.
And in a pretty disruptive way, yeah.
Yeah, it's messy. It can leave you wondering if there's maybe a more stable path forward somewhere. What if a really innovative solution, maybe drawing on ideas from the past, could offer that stability?
Well, that's exactly where our deep dive kicks off today. Forget the sort of temporary fixes and the endless disputes for a moment.
Okay.
We're going to explore a concept that really aims to fundamentally reshape international trade. And it does it by looking at some powerful historical ideas and updating them for the digital age.
So we're talking about revisiting the vision of, well, the brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes.
That's right.
Specifically his plan for an international currency union back in the 1940s. But here's the really fascinating twist, the update. Instead of his proposed currency, Bancor, which never actually happened, right?
It was theoretical.
We're going to delve into how a real-world cyber-currency, something like Bitcoin, could potentially fill that role.
And this isn't just a random thought experiment. The document we're digging into, Keynes 2025 cybercurrency.pdf by Lev Neymotin, it presents a really detailed and frankly compelling model for exactly this kind of system.
Okay.
So our goal today is basically to break this idea down, understand the mechanics, and explore what the implications could be. The far-reaching ones.
Right. So you, the listener, get a clear picture of a possible future for global commerce.
Exactly. Cutting through the complexity, trying to reveal the core insights.
Okay, let's get into the core of this then. The main idea, it's actually pretty simple when you boil it down.
It is, surprisingly.
Imagine a neutral global cyber currency. Let's just use Bitcoin as the example for now, like the paper does. But it's used only for settling international trade between nations.
Crucially, yes. Only for that.
And importantly, each country would still use its own national currency, dollars, euros, yen, whatever, for all its domestic stuff.
Precisely. Your local currency, whatever it is, stays the currency for your day-to-day life inside your country. This cyber currency layer, it only kicks in when one country wants to trade with another.
Okay, so to really get how this would work, maybe walk us through an example.
Yeah, a concrete example helps. Let's say country A is a big car exporter.
Okay.
And it sells, say, 100 Bitcoin worth of cars to country B.
Got it.
And at the same time, country B, maybe they're leaders in electronics, sells 60 Bitcoin worth of electronics back to country A.
Right, a two-way trade. How does the money actually move?
Okay, this is where the Cyber-Bancor Union, or CBCU, comes in.
CBCU, right.
Think of it like a central clearinghouse for these international trade settlements. But, and this is key, it operates on a blockchain.
Ah, like a distributed, secure digital ledger.
Exactly. So both country A and country B would have these digital accounts within this union, this CBCU. Now, when country B buys the cars, it doesn't just send 100 Bitcoin directly to country A's, general wallet. No. Instead, it transfers 100 BTC to country A's account within the CBCU.
Ah, within the system.
Within the system. And similarly, country A transfers 60 BTC to country B's CBCU account for those electronics.
So all the international payments happen inside this specific CBCU structure. What's the end result of those two trades then?
Right. So after these transactions are logged on the blockchain, you just look at the net balances in their CBCU accounts.
Okay.
Country A received 100 BTC, paid out 60 BTC. So they have a surplus of 40 BTC in their CBCU account.
Plus 40. Makes sense.
And country B, they paid out 100 BTC, received 60 BTC. So they end up with a deficit of 40 BTC in their account.
That was 40. Okay.
And the really significant part is that all of the transfers, the resulting balances, it's all automatically recorded and settled right there on the blockchain.
Making it, unchangeable and transparent?
Exactly.
Right.
An unalterable, transparent record of those international trade flows.
Okay. That clarifies the international side using the cyber currency. But how do our normal currencies, the dollars and euros, get involved at the start? If a car company in country A sells to someone in country B, they're probably thinking in their own money.
That's a really crucial point to understand, yeah. The link, the interface between the national currencies and the cyber currency, it happens at the level of the individual businesses, the importers and exporters in each country.
How so?
Okay, let's take that company in country A wanting to buy the electronics from country B.
Okay.
They wouldn't deal in Bitcoin directly, usually.
Right.
They'd pay their local bank in their own national currency. Let's say it's $8.
Okay.
The bank then takes those A dollars, converts them into Bitcoin at whatever the current market exchange rate is, and then the bank transfers that Bitcoin through the CBCU system to country D's account.
I see. And the reverse for the cars.
Exactly the reverse.
Yeah.
The company in country B buying the cars pays its bank in BN or whatever.
Right.
The bank converts the BN to Bitcoin and sends that Bitcoin through the CBCU to country A's account.
Wow. Okay. So our national currencies are like the on-ramps and off-ramps.
Good way to put it, yeah.
But the actual highway for cross-border trade settlement, that's exclusively this neutral cybercurrency handled by the CBCU.
Precisely. No other national currency gets directly involved in the international transaction itself.
That really is a fundamental shift from how we usually think about international payments, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And this whole structure, this framework, it enables a particularly interesting mechanism to tackle, well, one of the biggest headaches in global trade.
Which is?
Those chronic trade imbalances.
Yeah.
Where some countries just keep exporting way more than they import year after year.
Right. Building up huge surpluses.
And others are perpetually running deficits, always buying more than they sell.
Yeah, that causes friction.
Huge friction. So this system introduces what the author, Neymotin, calls surplus and deficit discipline.
Discipline. Okay, that sounds like it might have some teeth. What actually happens if a country just keeps buying more than it sells, running up that deficit in its CBCU account?
Well, if a country is running a persistent deficit, the system proposes several potential consequences, sort of automatically triggered.
Like what?
First, they might get charged interest on their negative balance, their cybercurrency debt within the CBCU.
Ah, a direct financial cost.
Yeah, creates a clear incentive to reduce that deficit. Second, the system could potentially impose limits on their imports or maybe levy higher transaction costs if the deficit gets too big or lasts too long.
So real pressure.
Real pressure. But the main driver, the underlying goal, is to encourage these countries to become more competitive globally.
How?
To boost their exports of goods and services. Or, as the paper also suggests, maybe even consider adjusting their domestic currency's exchange rate to make their exports cheaper and more attractive internationally.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a built-in nudge or maybe a shove towards getting back towards equilibrium.
Exactly.
Now, what about the other side? The countries that consistently run those big surpluses, selling way more than they buy. It kind of seems like that's the good position to be in.
You'd think so, but not necessarily within this specific system design. Surplus countries also face potential consequences.
Really? Like what?
They might have to pay holding fees, sort of like negative interest, on excessive reserves of the cybercurrency they pile up in their CBCU account.
So it costs them money to just sit on a huge pile of cybercurrency.
Precisely. It discourages just hoarding wealth without putting it back into the global economy somehow.
Interesting.
The system also pushes these surplus countries, gives them incentives to take actions that would naturally reduce their surplus.
Such as,
well, importing more goods and services from other nations. Or maybe raising wages for their own workers.
How would raising wages help?
Well, higher wages could lead to more domestic demand, meaning their citizens buy more stuff, including imports.
Ah, okay. Indirect effect.
Right. Or they could invest their surplus capital abroad in other economies.
So the key insight here is that the system tries to automate this rebalancing act.
That's the core idea, yeah. To make global trade rebalancing less reliant on, messy political negotiations or unilateral actions like tariffs, which often just disrupt things without solving the underlying problem.
So it's designed as a two-way street. Neither persistent deficits nor huge unspent surpluses are encouraged.
Exactly.
It aims to create this kind of self-regulating loop in global trade. That's actually quite an elegant design on paper.
It is, theoretically. And beyond just tackling imbalances, the proposed system has several other features built in, aimed at making global trade fairer and more stable overall.
Okay, like what?
Well, a really central aspect is neutrality.
Neutrality.
Yeah. By using a cybercurrency like Bitcoin, something not controlled by any single government or central bank.
Right. Unlike, say, the US dollar currently.
Exactly. It removes the potential for one country to kind of manipulate the global monetary system purely for its own advantage, maybe by printing money or setting interest rates in a way that harms others.
Okay, removing that risk of one nation's policy having an unfair global impact, what other fairness mechanisms are there?
Transparency is another huge one.
Because of the blockchain?
Precisely. Because the whole system runs on that blockchain ledger, every single international trade transaction would be permanently recorded.
And everyone can see it. Or at least it's auditable.
Auditable and tamper-proof.
Yeah.
It dramatically reduces the chance for, secret side deals or fudging the trade data.
Right. Okay.
And then there's the automation piece we touched on.
Smart contracts.
Yeah, smart contracts. Think of them as little programs that run automatically when conditions are met. They can be used to automatically apply those penalties for imbalances we talked about or record the transactions, all without needing direct human intervention or potential bias.
That sounds incredibly efficient. Maybe too efficient. What about unexpected stuff? A massive global economic crisis or just a legitimate disagreement between two countries about a trade deal. Can automation handle everything?
That's a very fair question. And no, automation can't handle everything. That's where the crucial element of human governance comes back in.
Okay, so there's still people involved.
Absolutely. The proposal lays out a pretty structured governance framework specifically to deal with those complex situations, handle exceptions to the rules, or immediate disputes that might pop up.
Okay, let's dig into that governance structure a bit then. Who would actually be in charge of this whole Cyber-Bancor Union, the CBCU?
It's proposed as a multi-layered structure, kind of like you see in some international organizations.
Right.
At the very top, you'd have a Cyber-Bancor Board of Governors.
There's on that.
The idea is one representative from each member country. This board sets the big picture policies, they'd approve any changes to the rules or the penalties, make the major strategic calls.
Okay, the main policy body.
Then below that, you'd likely have an executive committee. These folks would manage the day-to-day running of the CBCU, make sure the rules are enforced, coordinate the tech and legal sides.
The operational managers.
Right. And then you'd need specialized teams. For instance, an audit and compliance team, constantly monitoring the trade flows, looking for any funny business or irregularities.
Makes sense.
And of course, tech and blockchain teams, really important to maintain the system, upgrade the infrastructure, keep it secure.
And what about disagreements?
That's the final piece mentioned. A dispute resolution panel, a specific body set up to handle conflicts or appeals if countries can't agree on something.
Okay, so it sounds like a pretty well-defined structure, at least in theory, with checks and balances.
That seems to be the intent, yes.
Now, what happens to countries that, for whatever reason, decide not to join this Cyber-Bancor Union? What are the implications for them?
Well, for non-member countries, the challenges could be pretty significant.
How so?
They wouldn't have direct access to the CBCU for settling their international trade using the cybercurrency.
Meaning
they'd basically be excluded from what could become the most efficient and maybe lowest cost way to conduct international trade if this system took off.
So they'd be kind of on the outside looking in, potentially at a real disadvantage.
That's the likely outcome, yeah.
What options would they even have to trade internationally then?
Their options would probably be less efficient, maybe more expensive. They could try to negotiate, separate bilateral trade deals with individual member countries outside the CBCU framework.
But that sounds cumbersome.
It could be, and maybe limited in scope. Or they might explore if the union allowed some kind of partial membership, but that would probably come with fewer benefits.
Any other ways?
Another possibility is what you might call intermediary routing. Meaning they trade with a country that is a member, and that member country then acts as a go-between to facilitate trade with other union members.
But that adds extra steps, extra costs, right?
Exactly, as layers and transaction costs. Or, they could try to fall back on much older methods of barter, maybe using gold or other alternative payment systems. But those are generally much less efficient and probably not suited for the sheer scale of modern global trade.
Yeah, hard to run a modern economy on barter. It sounds like staying outside the union would put a country in a really tough spot economically.
That's definitely a key point the proposal emphasizes.
Creating a strong incentive to join.
A very strong incentive, yes. The idea is that the economic advantages of being in the union efficiency, lower costs, stability, combined with the potential disadvantages of being outside, would create this powerful pull for countries not just to join, but also to stay compliant with the rules once they're in.
Okay. To really hammer home the differences between Keynes' original Bancor idea and this modern cybercurrency version, let's just quickly highlight the main distinctions. The document you mentioned had a useful summary, right?
Absolutely. Let's tick through them. First, the global currency itself. Keynes proposed Bancor a fictional, abstract unit of account.
Right. Never existed.
This modern proposal swaps that out for a real existing cybercurrency. The paper uses Bitcoin as the main example, but it could potentially be another established one.
That's a huge difference right there. Theory versus reality. What about how trades are actually settled and recorded?
In Keynes' original plan, settlements would probably have been done using, traditional bookkeeping, maybe manual ledgers managed by the central body.
Old school.
Yeah. The Cyber-Bancor idea, on the other hand, leverages blockchain technology for a fully transparent, automated, and auditable ledger of every single transaction.
Much more modern. And what about the role of our everyday national currencies?
That's one area where they're actually similar. Both Keynes' original concept and this cyber adaptation preserve the use of national currencies.
So countries keep their dollars, euros, etc. for everything domestic.
Correct. That fundamental part stays the same in both models. Your local money is for local business.
Okay. Now, how about enforcing those rules about surpluses and deficits? That seems like a critical point of difference.
It is. Keynes' plan involved mechanisms like charging interest on overdrafts or potentially setting limits on how big imbalances could get, managed by the central authority.
So more discretionary.
Potentially, yeah. The modern proposal leans heavily on using those smart contracts we talked about, built into the blockchain.
To do what?
To automatically apply any agreed-upon penalties or charges or fees. It makes the enforcement potentially much more seamless, rule-based, and maybe less vulnerable to, say, political pressures or arguments.
Interesting. What about the overall governance? Who's in charge?
Keynes' original idea seemed to imply a fairly powerful, centralized international body making decisions.
A world central bank, almost.
Sort of, yeah. The Cyber-Bancor model described here emphasizes a more transparent and rule-based system, governed by the member states through the board. But it still absolutely includes that essential human oversight through the board and the committees for complex issues.
Right. And finally, transparency. How easy is it to see what's going on?
Keynes' system, relying on older record-keeping, would likely have been less inherently transparent to the public, or even all members.
More behind closed doors.
Potentially. The cybercurrency version, being built on a blockchain, offers a fundamentally higher degree of automated transparency. All the core transactions are on that distributed ledger, open to audit.
Okay, this has been a really, really fascinating deep dive into a concept that could, well, potentially change everything about global trade.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
So if you had to boil it down, what's the single key takeaway we should really hold on to from this?
I think the core takeaway is the sheer potential for a neutral cyber-currency-based system to fundamentally reshape international trade as we know it.
How so?
It offers this compelling approach to tackling those persistent, destabilizing trade imbalances. It could mitigate the risks we see now with national monetary policy spilling over and causing global issues, and it promises a whole new level of transparency and maybe efficiency.
And looking back at our discussion, what's one insight that really stood out as particularly surprising or elegant?
For me, honestly, it's the elegance of that self-balancing mechanism idea.
The push and pull on surplus and deficit countries.
Exactly. The way it's designed to create these almost automatic incentives for both sides, surplus and deficit countries, to adjust their economies.
Yeah.
Driven by pre-agreed rules and automated processes, rather than just endless political fights.
Yeah.
And tied to that, the potentially very strong economic pressure it could generate for countries to actually join and play by the rules.
It definitely gives you a completely fresh lens to look through when you hear about current global economic debates, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And think about the future role of digital currencies.
For sure. This isn't just about finding a new way to send money across borders. It's potentially about re-architecting the entire landscape of how nations interact economically.
Okay, so here's a final thought then, something for you, our listener, to chew on. What do you think would be the single biggest hurdle, the toughest challenge, in actually trying to implement a system like this on a global scale? It sounds great on paper, but the real world.
Yeah, the practicalities are huge.
Yeah. And maybe looking beyond just the trade benefits, what unexpected positive side effects, what ripple effects might emerge if the world did manage to shift to something like this? What else might change?